Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather coming at you with another video. In this update, we're going to be talking about some tropical trouble that's possibly going to be brewing in the Gulf this week with Tropical Storm Cristobal. Here's the latest National Hurricane Center advisory as of 8 a.m. on Monday. This is the beginning of hurricane season, June 1st. And we've got an 80% chance of something trying to develop in the Bay of Campeche later on this week. So why would that be? So let's kind of delve into the details and how this is going to evolve over the next week. We've had high pressure pretty much bake in the southwest with record high temperatures. They've already hit like 112 in Phoenix, like 120 in Death Valley. It's been super hot for May, but that high is going to be extending into the middle part of the country. And whatever you have a high pressure centered above, you're always looking for convergence underneath. That tends to lower some pressures into the Gulf of Mexico and start to some sort of create some low-level center. All right, so then we also look at what they call the MJO, which is the Mann-Julia oscillation. As you can see, this is an outlook from May the 25th through the June the 8th. But as we start getting into June, it starts to filter into what they call phase 2. So whenever you get into phase 2, this is almost like prime time cold weather for in the winter months for phase 2 and 3, but it's also tropical trouble weather for hurricane season. So as we get into the first week of June, as we're getting into now, starts to go into phase 2, and that tends to be a favorable phase for tropical storm development. We also look at the JMA. Now, this is the Japanese model, and I look at this and we kind of zoom into the U.S., and by week 2 of June, you start to see these blues. Now, these blues indicate upward rising motion or vertical velocity index. These orange and yellows indicate kind of suppression, where it squashes the air down. So the air would be in a favorable phase for some upward rising motion into the Gulf of Mexico, which would create that lift that you need to create the thunderstorms, possibly with the combination of the lower pressures to create that low level spin and start to get a tropical storm developing. Now, as we zoom into the satellite picture, here's an overall outlook. Now, this is Central America. Down below is what was Tropical Storm Amanda. Now, Amanda fizzled out, but now we're seeing the remnants of Amanda into Belize. Now take you back. We already had a tropical depression, which was the earliest on record for two weeks prior to hurricane season in the Pacific, May 15th. That originated around the beginning of May. Then Amanda formed several days ago. And we've already had 2 named storms in the Atlantic with Arthur and Bertha. And now we're possibly looking at Tropical Storm Cristobal, which would be the 3rd named storm of the year. Now, granted, the season really only starts today, and it runs from June 1st through November 30th. So if this forms before June 5th, it would be the earliest on record, beating 2016 when Tropical Storm Colin formed on June 5th. So if this actually named a storm prior to June 5th, it would be the earliest on record, and we're well on our way for an above average season. So then you kind of ask yourself, well, if it was Amanda, does it actually keep the same name, or does it go into get named Cristobal? Well, that's actually an interesting question, because if you go back all the way to 1842, there's been essentially 14 named storms and 5 on the Pacific side that have basically transfers from the Atlantic to the Pacific, but from then 14 named storms from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, prior to the year 2000, they actually used to keep their name, but the National Weather Service coordinated together and said, hey, after 2000, if it loses its luster or loses its name, essentially, then it gets renamed on the Atlantic side. So the last time that actually happened was Hurricane Hermine back in 2010, where it kept the same name when it transfers over onto the Atlantic side. So that's just a little bit of a history. But in this case, the remnant low of Amanda is no longer. And so even though the remnants of potentially Amanda will traverse and kind of bleed into the Bay of Campeche, it's going to be renamed on the Atlantic side, and it will be Tropical Storm Cristobal. So now let's kind of take you into what they call the ensemble members. And so now we're trying to look at some sort of guidance. You know, they have what they call an invest has formed. There's an 80% chance of it developing, and it's invest 93L. So taking a look at some of these ensemble members, and these are a collaboration of all different model runs, and you start to look at these first before you start to look at like individual model runs, and it kind of takes it into lifts it north. The original, typically the origin of June, if it forms out into the Atlantic, it's going to swing off into Florida and up to the southeast coast, like we actually saw with Arthur. Now this one's actually forming a little bit further into like Belize area, and that typically brings it into Texas, into Louisiana, and that's a lot of the guidance is kind of leaning towards that. Now, another reason why that would be, right now we've got some high pressure off the Atlantic coast here off the Florida, would be steering this to tad bit to the northwest, but we also have high pressure to the north as well, which would filter it north. So it may start to take a northeast jog, but then this high pressure kind of loses its luster, and the high up north kind of more or less takes over and dominates, would bring it more north and maybe kind of slightly bend it towards the west, which would imply more of a Texas and Louisiana type landfall in like a week or so, right? So if we take a look at the European model, it's actually even more bullish on that type of scenario, where if anything that forms right now, it's what they call a central gyra. It's basically a conglomerate of just upper level winds, and it's trying to get some sort of circulation, trying to form like a low level center. And right now we're about an 80% chance of that happening. So over the coming days, anything to develop would be slow, but as it starts to develop, it would possibly lift and feel the effects of that high pressure, and would lift it up north into Texas and Louisiana, and the center of that track would bring it essentially right into the Houston area in about a week or so. So anybody along the Texas coast and Louisiana coast would have to be paying high alert for this over the next couple days, and especially as we go into week 2 of June. Now, if we take a look at the overall Weather Protection Center for the next 7 days, now granted, a lot of these tropical systems are what they call right quadrant storms. So, and they're east loaded. So as it spins anticyclonic, it would form a lot of that moisture on the east side, which would this week in June, first week of June, would impact much of Florida with some heavy rainfall, especially along the coast into the southeast. But as we go potentially into week 2 of June, now we're looking at some of these water precipitation indexes taking a heavier tilt towards the Texas coast. And this would actually be June the 9th. And this is implying the spin would be somewhere near the Texas coast by then, with some very heavy rainfall and deep tropical moisture filtering into Texas. So we have no idea how strong it will be right now. The ensemble members are all over the place, anywhere from a low-end tropical storm all the way to a Category 2 hurricane. So we don't really know yet until like a low-level center actually forms to see how actually strong it would get. But now, granted, this is June 1st, so typically this time of year, these are more of a heavy rainmaker than a potential wind threat. But we do have a lot of deep tropical moisture, a lot of warm available potential temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico. So we do have some shear to contend with as well. So we'll just have to see this play out. But the main threat with this system would be heavy rainfall, and by week 2 from the European model would be imply over the next 10 days we're starting to get some of those heavier rain bands into central Texas, and this could be a lot, folks. So we'll have to really keep an eye on this system week 1 and especially week 2 of June, especially into Texas, Louisiana, and watch the ultimate track. And if we zoom into the EPS guidance, which takes you all the way through the middle of the month of June, would also imply more of a heavier rain band into the southern regions, and also filtering into much of Texas. And if we expand the view even further, the Climate Prediction Center has went ahead yesterday and implemented week 3 and 4 of above average precipitation for the state of Texas, as that tropical feature would be hanging around of the tropical flow, especially as the MJO goes into those favorable phases 2 and 3 as we go into the middle and later part of June. So that'll give you a quick update on what's happening with the tropics. I appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. If you did find value in this video, please subscribe to my channel and definitely catch me in the next video where I protect you before and after the storm.